Okay, great. Just doing a quick check. Everyone can see my screen?
Looks good.
Okay, excellent. All right, so thanks for the introductions. Alie and I are excited to be here. We're going to be giving an update on the community science efforts here in Nebraska, and also some of the conversations that we've been exposed to that are on a national and even international level. First, I want to just alert you to a comment that I put in the chat. We are presenting using Menti, so there will be some questions that we're going to ask for audience participation. So you just go to menti.com and you use the code that is in the chat, 5443-8841. You can do that on your phone or on another tab in your web browser. Or if you don't want to go that route, you can just also add responses to the chat, like Monica said. So with that, we're actually going to start you with, we're going to provide this update. And then because we're chatting about community science, one of the things that has been come up in some of our conversations and discussions is what does that mean? So to help kind of frame this with the audience that we have here, we'd like to invite you to answer the question, what does community science mean to you? And we'll also give you a moment to just log into menti.com and get situated before we continue on. And I should have some Jeopardy music here, but I don't. And you could just use a few words to describe it too. Excellent, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to just leave that open, let people get into Menti. And one of the things that we often like to clarify is community science means different things, but one of the things it doesn't mean, at least as we approach this through the network, is outreach programs where there's not data collection that's contributing to some research purpose or inquiry about the world around us. So these are great responses, and I think there's kindred spirits here in the audience that I'm seeing. Everyone is a scientist. I always like to point that one out as well. Then it's a collaborative effort, that the purpose is data. So I think some of these big responses are really coming out here. Inclusion, we'll be covering that in today's presentation as well. Increased science literacy, connecting with nature. And I think these are kind of pulling on some of what Lindsay and Amber have also presented already. But I think it's clear too that collaboration and data are the big ones kind of standing out here in addition to community. So we have some people still coming on here. I'll just give it a moment. Thanks for participating in this too, by the way. This is a beautiful cloud. Increased sample size. Yes, worrying together. And accessibility. BioBlitz, thanks for adding that one in. Engagement. Okay, great. So these are great descriptive terms that we use. And legacy, I want to point that one out too. Thanks for adding that in, because it really is all research has some legacy that it should be contributing to, shouldn't it? So with that, I'm going to hand this off to Alie to cover some of the discussions that we've been having about community science.
Great, thanks, Louise. So yeah, as we're talking about community science and what that means, it is collaboration with science. But one of the topics that has come up since we started trying to grow community science in Nebraska is, what do we call it? What do we call community or citizen science? What's the best words to use? So when we started the Community Scientists of Nebraska Network, we did go with the name citizen science. We were following the CSA, so the Citizen Science Association's lead. That's a term that is used on an international scale to kind of talk about this discipline. But as this field grows and it expands, so does the words that we use to describe it. So as we continued to have conversations about, how do we be inclusive? How do we get new people to participate? We wanted to rethink what we called our network. And so we decided to do a survey. So can I get a slide change, please? Thanks.
There we go.
So we did a survey earlier this year just to get some input on what our network wanted to be called. And we had 56 respondents. They were allowed to choose more than one option. So community science or citizen science or participatory science or something else entirely. But the majority of people who responded did like the term community scientist. They thought that that best represented what they did. But it's fair to point out that a large portion still were in favor of the term citizen science. So it's not as though any of these terms are going to go away, but we thought for our network and our network's mission, if you want to go to the next slide, that community scientists of Nebraska best fit this. And we did decide this as a collaborative of the core group. So the core group, if you want to go to the next slide, is made up of organizations across the state who help guide the network. And in our effort to be inclusive and to increase community science participation across the state, we have been very intentional about having organizations involved from all across the state. And we've done that fairly well. So we have Lincoln, Omaha, Grand Island, Kearney, and Scottsbluff as locations of where our core group members reside. But all of our organizations involved do work across the state. So there is really that intention of getting the whole state involved with community science. So next slide. So our network membership also reflects pretty well a statewide distribution. We are a little heavy in the eastern side of the state of where organizations are located from, but we have seen interest and involvement from all across the state. Next slide. And as a network, we do have an audience in mind. When we started the network to try to increase community science participation, we had a conversation. Is this network for facilitators of community science projects? Is it for educators or is it for the general public? And we ultimately decided it was for everybody. We want to work with facilitators and project leaders who are kind of doing that top-down approach of community science to get, more the word out about their projects on a statewide level, get more involvement with them. We want educators to be involved with community science to get their students involved and kind of leverage the power of community science to do increase scientific literacy. And then we want to serve the general public and get people involved, not only on the level of participating in kind of those top-down projects, but also what's the level of interest in people starting their own projects? What questions are there? Like, what support can we provide people to take on their own research initiatives?
So for this, that third group and also the educators, there's obviously been this conversation about terminology, and that's really here in the United States. I think that conversation is strongest. But then I think also nationally, certainly regionally, and here with the network and elsewhere, there's been a conversation about who's getting involved. And so I wanted to cover a couple of examples of this, but when we look at, I'm interested in research on the educational outcomes, behavioral outcomes, and knowledge outcomes of citizen science and community science. And one thing that's repeatedly acknowledged is the demographic representation in these projects. And so this is one, I was involved in surveying several entomology projects. I think on the next slide, I have the actual ones listed. But this was the kind of demographic profile that I came across for my research. So it was mostly white and European American participants. And this is from a smaller survey size. It was 86 individuals. In this particular survey, it was overwhelmingly male. They were middle-aged. The average was 47 years of age. They were college educated, so 67% of them had college degrees, so bachelor's, master's, or higher. And then some of them had employment as scientists and as researchers or science educators. So this obviously influenced what their responses would be to questions I had about their educational some of the educational gains that we might have seen or the behavioral changes. And so this does a couple of different things. Again, this profile has been acknowledged repeatedly in research. Mine is just one example, I think, of many. And especially when we're doing, Amber mentioned this, that there's, she had mentioned traditional ecological knowledge, but essentially there's different ways of knowing the world around us or different paradigms. And so when we have just a certain demographic represented in these projects, we're also limiting understanding of the natural world and what is around us. So there's that limitation or restriction, if you will, because of these demographics. And then also our understanding of what the outcomes are. If we're studying, knowledge gains or decision making or participation in local government, routed through community science or other volunteer programs, and we have a limited demographic profile, then we're not really understanding what these projects are actually capable of or what they are doing. And so this is another example of one. I wish I had more variety in who was participating in some of the projects that I've run. But again, this was one looking at participant experiences, how they experienced science. And so I was really proud of this work. But as these conversations have been occurring nationally and internationally, it's kind of made me question, I wonder if I ask these same questions to different people and different participants, would I see the same thing? So I had mapped out how people go through and move through citizen and community science programs. And in this situation, these were also entomology programs, but it was also mostly older generation. So the average was about 53 years of age. People involved in multiple projects in some cases. This particular group was mostly female. And then also just several people that had more formal education beyond high school. And also, some in there that had that previous employment as a scientist or a researcher. So again, this kind of influences, what I thought I was doing to characterize how volunteers experience community science. It's just one cultural approach to that. So these are some of the conversations we've been having kind of internally. And so to help us try to broaden participation and establish the Community Scientists of Nebraska network, we pursued a grant through the Nebraska Environmental Trust this past year, what was actually in 2020. And so we wanted to provide a quick update on that as well. We were awarded the grant in March of 2020. And then of course, COVID-19 came in April. So we did obtain an extension on the grant in January of 2020. And then Alie mentioned the name change for the network. So we started having those conversations in early 2021, gathered intel from people, and then went with the network change. And that was to reflect also our goal of not just having the traditional community science projects, but we also wanted to represent other fields that now have that volunteer approach to data collection in the medical field. We see this in history as well. There are more projects that are involved. So outside of the natural sciences, and then also to kind of reflect some other different approaches to collaborating with the public, like community-based participatory research. So we kind of wanted to broaden who we could link together in this state through a regional approach. So we made our name change in March 2021, and then we had some outreach. We had hoped for more, but we had some outreach during SITSI month, which is typically April of each year. So we did get some events up and out and running, and we also had kind of rebranded and reworked our mission and the network name. So we're kind of ready to jump out in that regard. And then we also had a shift in the grant to graphic design and direct contact with people, since we weren't going to be attending these large public outreach and table events that we had initially wanted to, and the travel was restricted. So we kind of moved or shifted our way of communicating with people a little bit. One of the outcomes was that we actually got to collaborate with some undergraduate and other students here at UNL. So these are three of the students that we worked with. We had Sienna Can, who's with the UNL Johnny Carson School, and she helped do graphic design for several of the materials that we now needed in order to try to connect with Nebraska public. We also had Natalia Bjorklund, from the entomology department here at UNL, and she's been helping currently also with project management. And again, we kind of shifted from traveling now to reaching out to people directly, mostly through email. So she's been helping with that effort. And then Generous Tarabwe, who's a UNL applied science student, and she also helped with project outreach and was also new to community science. So this offered her an opportunity to figure out how she might apply that back home and with agricultural efforts. So it was an unexpected switch or shift in the grant, but it's kind of opened up new opportunities for collaborating with students in order to meet that demand for that change. So these are some examples of some of the items that we came up with that we've been pushing out through the state. I also wanted to mention, I really enjoyed Lindsay's coverage of the survey. We also did go with a print run with the Nebraska Press Association, so a newspaper run, because of some of our own internal surveys and questions of stakeholders. How do you like to receive your information? And so newspaper was one. We have not broken into radio yet. We'll have to polish our singing voices, Alie. But maybe that will be something that we'll look into based on those surveys results. Those were kind of fascinating. And obviously social media graphics are huge. That's been one of the key ways that we've been reaching out to people. And then here on the right, we'll be getting this out more, but we have printed posters too. So we will be going that route and posting at community places like libraries, for example. So one thing, while we had you all in the room, all you lovely folks, we wanted to ask you too, where do you get information about or go to community and volunteer events? So while you're answering that, I'll just comment too. I think as we move into this new cycle, we'll be wrapping up the grant this year, and early next year, I think we'll be taking a next step into reaching out to people. And so we want to make sure that we're using the methods of communication that people have. And so this is going to be a 2-word cloud, isn't it? Let's see. Okay, great. There we go. So yeah, Facebook is a big one. I will mention that Alie runs a lot of our social media, but especially the Instagram. And so that's one that it's been great to see that kind of take off. And we will certainly continue with newspaper and radio. Yeah, I guess we're going to have to give that a shot. Okay. Local environmental groups. Great. And I think as things ease up, we're kind of looking forward to meeting with groups. In some of the outreach that Natalia Bjorklund's been doing, we have gotten some responses from people that they have groups, either science focused or community focused groups. So I'm hoping we'll be able to visit with them soon. Sometimes that is just a nice approach. Okay, great. Well, thanks for this feedback. I appreciate that. So for some of these places, I can see us posting those posters, those flyers at coffee shop boards. That would be great. Okay, excellent. Thank you. And so these are some of the changes that we've seen we have a Google group, a listserv, if you will. So the listserv numbers, we kind of started with the grant in March. It's really when when we kicked things off. So we started with about 57 members on that group. And currently, yesterday, we had 112 people. So we're hoping to continue to see that drive go up. And obviously that uses email, which resonated with this audience as well, as a means of communication. We're also working on building up a directory of projects. And I have the website brought up for those of you that are interested. But we're looking for Nebraska-based projects to push to the public and increase awareness about them, and then also increase awareness in engagement in these projects, i.e. increased data contributions to them. So we started out with 4, and this has been one where we've really had to push and do some of the searching on our own, but we have 10 projects currently listed in the directory. On Facebook and on Instagram, we've seen some upward shifts as well. So we've had a lot of likes and follows in Facebook, and that's increased. And then Instagram was an easy bolster because we started out with that fresh, and that's currently at 167 followers there. And then also for website users, in the beginning there, we've been trying to push the URL for the website as a housing place for information about Nebraska's community science projects. So that started out at about 7 users, and then this is cumulative. But we're currently at about 247 users. So this is one that we'd also like to see improve. Oh, didn't do that. Okay. Okay, and then Alie, I'm going to let her take off outreach.
Yeah, so we weren't able to do as much outreach in person as we would have liked this year. So one of the shifts we did was to do this virtual Nebraska Summer Science Power Week, where we featured some projects from around the state, which are listed there, and worked with some partners to get out like some videos and social media posts, just to kind of show the diversity of projects throughout the state. Next slide. And then one in-person event we were able to do this year was Star City Pride here in Lincoln. So we had about 4 or 5 of our partner organizations who helped man the booth at the event. And there was a lot of really good outreach that happened at the event. A lot of really good conversations with people who had never heard of community science before, and quite a few of our listserv kind of bump in numbers came from this event. Next slide.
Sorry, just navigating Zoom here. Okay.
And then looking into the future, right now the Citizen Science Association is working on planning their annual conference for next May. And in this conference, they really want to focus on regional connections, which fits right in with what we want to do. So the conference is looking to have kind of regional hubs that are both participating in this international conference, but also doing some events that are focused more on regional efforts. So this isn't a set thing yet, but this is what our focus will be for the next year with outreach, is kind of doing this regional hub. But one of the big conversations that's happening on the national scale right now in this planning is like, how do we define a region? You know, as people are looking for projects and information, what kind of scope are they looking for? And so that's a question we wanted to ask you today, is how would you define your region? So this might be through the work that you do, or maybe the volunteering that you do, the events you participate in, but how do you define your region?
And I think this will help us determine how we can, you know, as the Nebraska network, how we can best couple with the CSA, and how people identify region. Right. And I'm curious, yeah, that's another one. You know, we typically go with even how we've categorized the projects in the directory. They're typically by, you know, just like bzz, bzz, kind of like cutting the state into sections. And I'm curious if that is going to be useful for users. Okay, excellent. These are great responses. So we're kind of seeing diversity of, yeah, that like more traditional southeast area, the corners of the state, and then geography and larger ecosystems. And then, yeah, somebody just touched on that too, also outside the states. And I think that's when, you know, we organize within those boundaries, the state boundary, but I think there's going to be dip over, like, for example, with the Sandhills. You know, I think we're going to have to be mindful of how we organize regionally within the state. Okay. All right, we have one question. So for all of our social media, I'm just going to put this in the chat here. It's at Community Science NE. That is both for Facebook and for Instagram. Thanks for the question, Anne. And I think those are we have some discussion questions if this is a quiet group. I'll save those though, and maybe we can focus on questions that have come in.
Yeah, we have about 5 more minutes left.
Okay, great.
You covered the Facebook question. Otherwise, that is all that we have right now. So if you would like to go to those discussion questions, Louise.
Sure. It's kind of a broad, greedy question. We want to we want to know what you would like to see from the network, especially as we start planning for the new year. So that would be one.